The checkered flag, perhaps the most synonymous symbol with motorsports ever. For as long as racing has persisted, every driver's goal has been to capture this elusive prize. But how did a simple patterned flag become more recognizable than some nations' flags? Why do we use a checkered flag? And where is its origins? To discover this answer, you have to go back nearly 120 years. Automobile racing was in its infancy, and a 26-year-old man named William K. Vanderbilt Jr. was at work trying to establish one of America's first sanctioned motor races. He had recently inherited an immense family fortune and decided to take his part of the wealth into getting auto racing off the ground. Vanderbilt, when trying to sanction his first ever auto race in 1904, faced an immense legal battle. He was trying to have the race run in New York City, which to many at the time seemed like lunacy. Many thought that the roads he wished to run were still primarily for foot traffic and horse travel. In reality, they weren't wrong. So he decided to try and move out of the boroughs and into Nassau County to try and run the first auto race on the dirt roads that dominated that landscape. He put up a large amount of cash in hopes that many American car manufacturers would finally start investing in auto racing. The first race drew exactly what he wanted. Many cars and many drivers. 5 from the United States, another 5 from Germany, 6 from France, and another 2 from Italy. The first race in 1904 was won by George Heath after completing 10 laps around the roughly 30-mile course. The race took roughly 7 hours and was successful for drawing people into motor racing. One of the few photos from the event features this photo with a crowd of people looking at a car. And just barely off of the edge of this photo, you can see this faint pattern of black and white. If you look close at it, it almost seems like a flag paraded at the start-finish line. This makes you wonder, could this be the very first photo of a checkered flag being used in auto racing? Well, ultimately, it's hard to tell. As mentioned before, it is at the start-finish line and it kinda has the waviness of a flag, so it could very well be one. But with only a guesstimate to go off of, you can't confirm that this is in fact a flag. In the 1906 running of the Vanderbilt Cup, it is pretty evident that this is a photo of a checkered flag. This is without a doubt the first known use of a checkered flag during auto racing, the first time the victor took home a checkered pattern. Luis Wagner claimed victory with riding mechanic Luis Vett. The race is credited usually with it being the first official use of the checkered flag. And if that's the case, the next question to ask is, why did they use it? This is where some more theorizing comes in. Vanderbilt had gained much of his knowledge about organizing racing events from the men he knew involved with the 1906 French Grand Prix. Vanderbilt, over the first 2 runnings of the race, had struggled to maintain a safe crowd distance. On record with the crowd control, 200,000 people gathered for the 3rd race, which led to the first spectator being killed. The winner of the race would go on to say, quote, "Certainly the most nerve-wrenching contest in motoring history. Many people were close to being involved in accidents, and over the first 3 runnings, a spectator in the crowd was actually killed by another car." He contacted people who were involved with the 1906 French Grand Prix. Much of the talk pertained to crowd control, which the organizers of France had done a very good job of in their first race. Could it be coincidence or not that the first ever use of the checkered flag was right after he talked to the people in France? During the 1906 French Grand Prix, Hungarian, I'm going to mispronounce this, Ferenc Szent won in a Renault, and after looking through various photos of the event, the picture of the finish shows a solid colored flag waving over the winner. This doesn't immediately throw out the idea that maybe Vanderbilt got the idea of the checkered flag from the French. We can go back and look at photos from the 1900 to 1905 Gordon Bennett races that were held in France, the prologue races that became the French Grand Prix. However, looking through more photos of those races, there's no evidence that can be found of a checkered flag being used during those events. That means more than likely during the 1906 Vanderbilt Cup race, that is the first official unquestioned use of a checkered flag in auto racing. But then we go back to the question I asked earlier. Why? One of the first big theories is that its roots can be traced back to horse racing. The story goes that many of the Midwest would participate in horse racing events, and that usually they would stop by time for dinner. Most of the time the tablecloths were checkered, hence the checkered pattern ends the day of racing. But this doesn't really make any sense. Why would Vanderbilt know this piece of American culture? This is part of the Midwest lower class culture, and Vanderbilt was part of the high class of America. His family had been wealthy for over 250 years. A guy who literally spent motor racing into existence probably wouldn't have a clue of the dinner-time traditions of Midwest Middle America. This leads into another theory, that the checkered flag comes from maritime origins. This theory is much more plausible now. When you look up William K. Vanderbilt, Outside of his motor racing passion, the other one is yachting. He loved boating, and his family had made much of their fortune off of transportation. Before they became prominent with railroads, they were a large part of maritime travel and trade. Assuming that Vanderbilt had much of this culture instilled in him, it would not be surprising if he would translate over some of maritime culture into auto racing. This now takes us onto the culture of the high sea. For those who don't know, back before radio and radar, many ships rely primarily on the indication of flags flying on the mast, coding the other ships their actions. For centuries, many naval forces carried their own flag coding, with no common communication chain firmly established across all maritime travel. During the 19th century, however, when Great Britain had its firm grasp on the world, one of the throne's top naval commanders decided to pen a book clarifying the code of the waters. Captain Frederick Marryat wrote A Code of Signals for the Merchant Service. It was published in 1817, and in the book, a list of various flags is explained, and perhaps the most fascinating one is this. It's a checkered flag. The book explains the checkered pattern as this. Quote, flying rendezvous under the number indicates that the ship is sailing from Amsterdam, and flying at another masthead indicates that she is bound for the stated port. The checkered flag means rendezvous, home, a place of destination, the finish of a race. It is more than likely that Vanderbilt had that code of flagging instilled in him, and decided to carry that over to motor racing. What he did, though, was start a tradition, one that is carried to every form of motorsports there is, the universal symbol of racing.